He wasn't supposed to stop that night. Not on a road like this. Not for something that didn't make sense. But some choices don't belong to logic. They belong to something quieter, something older, something that feels like it was waiting for you long before you ever arrived. The highway stretched empty for miles, a thin ribbon of asphalt cutting through low woods and winter air that smelled faintly of pine and cold dust. The kind of road most people drove through without remembering. The kind of place where nothing ever happened until suddenly something did. Daniel Hayes kept both hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward, the soft hum of his truck the only sound keeping him company as the clock on the dashboard blinked 2:17 a.m., a time when the world felt paused, suspended between yesterday and whatever came next. His headlights carved a narrow path through the dark, catching glimpses of tree trunks, roadside markers, the occasional drift of mist curling low across the pavement like breath in the cold. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just driving, letting the miles pass the way he had learned to let everything pass, quiet, controlled, contained. And then something moved. Not fast, not sudden, just there. A shape where there should have been nothing. Daniel's foot hovered over the brake before his mind caught up, instinct tightening his chest as the figure stepped fully into the beam of his headlights and sat down in the middle of the road like it had nowhere else to be. He hit the brakes hard, tires whispering against asphalt, the truck slowing in a straight line until it came to a stop just yards away. For a moment, everything went still. The engine idled. The night held its breath. And in that white cone of light, he saw it clearly. A German shepherd. Large. Still. Its coat dark along the spine, lighter at the legs, catching the glow of the headlights and soft edges. But that wasn't what made his pulse shift. It was what the dog was carrying. Gently, carefully, held against its chest like something fragile, was a baby. Daniel blinked once, as if the image might correct itself, but it didn't. The dog didn't flinch, didn't back away. It just sat. There, square in the center of the lane, eyes locked on him with a focus that felt deliberate, almost measured, as if this moment had been chosen, not stumbled into. Hey. The word left his mouth without weight as he pushed the door open and stepped out into the cold, boots touching pavement that still held the faint warmth of the day. The air wrapped around him sharp and clean, carrying the distant rustle of leaves and something else, something quieter, like a warning you couldn't quite hear. He moved slowly, hands open at his sides, every instinct telling him not to startle what he didn't yet understand. The dog didn't growl, didn't shift. Its gaze followed him, steady, unwavering, and as Daniel got closer, he saw the baby's face. Too still, too quiet. No cry, no movement, just the soft rise and fall that told him the child was still breathing, but barely. A flicker of urgency hit his chest, quick and sharp, and he took another step forward. "It's okay," he said, though he wasn't sure who he was saying it to. The dog's ears twitched slightly, not in fear, but in recognition, and then it did something that made Daniel stop cold. It didn't hand the baby over. It didn't retreat. It simply held its ground, eyes fixed on his, as if asking a question no words could carry. And in that silence, with the night pressing in and the road stretching empty behind him, Daniel realized this wasn't a random moment. This was a decision. The dog had chosen him, and he had no idea why. Daniel did not reach for the baby right away because something in the dog's posture told him this was not a handoff yet. This was a pause, a held breath between two moments that had not fully revealed themselves. And the longer he stood there, the more he felt it. That quiet pressure in the air like the seconds before a storm breaks, subtle but undeniable. The dog adjusted its stance slightly, not stepping back, not stepping forward, just enough to shift the weight of the small body it carried, careful, deliberate, protective in a way that did not come from instinct alone, but from something learned, something remembered. Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold, and lowered himself. Just a fraction, not kneeling, not surrendering control, but meeting the animal halfway, the way he had been trained to approach something that could not speak, but clearly understood more than it should. "You brought me here," he said under his breath, the words barely louder than the wind moving through the trees. The dog blinked once, slow, steady, and for a second Daniel felt the strange certainty that it understood him, not the language, but the meaning behind it. His eyes shifted back to the baby, noticing details he had missed at first glance. the slight tremble of the tiny fingers, the faint condensation at the lips with each shallow breath. The way the blanket wrapped around the child was damp at the edges, as if it had been carried through brush or grass. This was not a roadside accident. This was movement. This was distance. The dog had traveled with this child. A chill ran deeper than the cold air as Daniel straightened slightly, scanning the darkness beyond the reach of his headlights, the trees standing still, silent witnesses with no answers to give. "Where did you come from?" he whispered, more to himself than to the animal. But the dog reacted, its ears flicking, its head turning just slightly toward the tree line on the right side of the road. It did not move yet. It just looked. And that was enough. Daniel followed its gaze, eyes narrowing, trying to force shapes out of shadow. But all he saw was darkness layered over more darkness, a depth that felt thicker than it should, as if something had passed through it not long ago and left the air unsettled. He looked back at the dog. "You want me to follow?" he said, not as a question, but as a realization that settled heavily in his chest. The dog held his gaze for one more second, then finally, slowly, it stood. The motion was controlled, careful not to jostle the baby, every step measured as it turned its body away from the road and toward the woods. It did not rush. It did not look back immediately. It simply began to walk, expecting him to understand. Daniel hesitated for half a heartbeat, instinct pulling him toward the child, toward the urgency of getting that small life into warmth and light and safety, but something stronger held him in place, the undeniable sense that if he broke this sequence, if he ignored what the dog was trying to show him, he would miss something that mattered just as much as the child in front of him. "All right," he said quietly, more to himself than anything else, and stepped forward, matching the dog's pace as it moved off the pavement and into the narrow gap between the trees where the darkness seemed to swallow sound. The headlights behind him cast long shadows that stretched and bent across the ground, then faded as he moved farther away, the road disappearing at his back, replaced by the soft crunch of leaves under his boots and the steady, silent presence of the dog ahead of him, carrying more than just a child, carrying a reason he had not yet begun to understand. The woods closed in around them with a quiet that felt heavier than silence, the kind that pressed against your ears and made every small sound carry farther than it should. Each step Daniel took echoing softly beneath the canopy as the faint glow from the road disappeared behind him and was replaced by a dim, uneven wash of moonlight filtering through branches above, thin and cold and barely enough to see by. The dog moved ahead with certainty, not fast, not slow, just steady, weaving between trees with a path that did not look like a path at all, yet it never hesitated, never doubled back, as if it had walked this exact route before and memorized every inch of it. Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the animal, careful not to lose sight of the only guide he had, his breath measured, controlled, though he could feel his pulse beginning to climb, not from fear exactly, but from the growing sense that whatever lay ahead was already in motion long before he arrived. The baby let out the faintest sound then, barely more than a breath catching in the throat, and Daniel felt it like a jolt through his chest, instinct pulling him forward a step faster. "Hang on, kid," he murmured, his voice low but steady, as if the sound alone could anchor that fragile rhythm of life. The dog slowed slightly at the sound, adjusting its hold with a gentleness that spoke of awareness, not panic, and for a brief moment it turned its head just enough for Daniel to see one eye catch the light, amber and focused, checking him, measuring him, making sure he was still there. That look settled something in him. Not comfort, not yet, but trust, or at least the beginning of it. They moved another 20 yards, maybe 30, though distance felt distorted in the dark, until the ground beneath Daniel's boots shifted from dry leaves to softer earth, damp and uneven, carrying a faint scent of something out of place, something that did not belong to untouched forest. He noticed it immediately, the way the air changed, subtle but real, like stepping into a space that had been disturbed recently. The dog stopped, not abruptly, not alarmed, just a quiet halt that made Daniel pause mid-step. For a second, nothing happened. No sound, no movement, just that same heavy stillness pressing in. Then the dog turned, fully this time, facing him, and lowered its head slightly toward the baby, as if drawing attention back to what mattered most. Daniel stepped closer, his hands lifting instinctively, and this time the dog did not resist. Slowly, carefully, it shifted forward, closing the small distance between them until Daniel could feel the warmth of the child through the blanket. He reached out, movements deliberate, steady, and took the baby into his arms. The weight was lighter than it should have been, fragile in a way that made him tighten his hold just enough to be secure, but not enough to disturb the shallow rhythm of breathing. The dog released without hesitation, stepping back half a pace, its eyes never leaving the child even as Daniel adjusted the blanket, checking quickly for any sign of awareness. "You are okay," he whispered, more promise than fact, though he was not yet sure either one was true. The baby's chest rose and fell, uneven but present, and Daniel felt a small surge of relief cut through the uncertainty. He looked up at the dog, expecting it to settle now, to stay close, but instead it turned its head again, this time not just glancing, but fixing its attention deeper into the trees beyond them. And then Daniel heard it. Not loud, not sharp, just a distant, irregular sound that did not belong to wind or leaves, something metallic shifting faintly against itself, almost hidden beneath the natural rhythm of the forest. His eyes narrowed, focus sharpening as he followed the direction of the dog's gaze. Whatever had happened here was not over, and whatever this dog had brought him to see was still waiting, just beyond where the light could reach. Daniel held still for a moment, listening, the baby's fragile weight against his chest grounding him in the present while his mind reached outward into the dark, trying to make sense of the faint metallic shift that lingered just beyond sight, a sound too deliberate to be natural, yet too quiet to immediately explain. The dog stood beside him now, no longer carrying but still leading, its posture alert but not panicked, ears angled forward, body slightly tense in a way that suggested awareness rather than fear. Daniel adjusted the blanket around the baby, tucking it closer against the cold, feeling the small warmth beneath his hands and the uneven rhythm of breath that reminded him there was no time to waste. And yet something held him there, something in the dog's insistence that this place mattered. "Show me," he said quietly, the words steady, and the dog responded without hesitation, turning and stepping forward again, deeper into the trees where the ground sloped gently downward and the air grew cooler, heavier, carrying that same faint scent of disturbance mixed with something metallic and unfamiliar. Each step Daniel took required more care now, roots catching at his boots, branches brushing against his jacket, the darkness thick enough that shapes blurred at the edges, forcing him to rely on sound and instinct as much as sight. The baby shifted slightly, a soft, weak movement that pressed against his chest, and Daniel instinctively tightened his hold, lowering his head just enough to shield the child from the chill. "Stay with me," he murmured, voice low and even, the kind of tone that held both command and comfort. The dog slowed again, then stopped completely near a small clearing where the trees opened just enough for the moonlight to fall more clearly across the ground, pale and thin, but enough to reveal what the darkness had been hiding. Daniel stepped forward carefully, eyes adjusting, and then he saw it. Not immediately in full, but in pieces, shapes that did not belong arranged in a way that told a quiet story. A vehicle rested at an angle among the trees, partially obscured by brush. Its front end dipped slightly into the earth, as if it had rolled just far enough to disappear from the road above. It was not crushed or shattered, not the kind of scene that spoke of chaos, but it was wrong, out of place, like something that had been left behind in a hurry or hidden just out of sight. Daniel's breath slowed, focus sharpening as he took in the details, the open door, the faint reflection of moonlight along the side, the stillness surrounding it that felt too complete, as if the moment had been frozen and forgotten. The dog moved closer to the edge of the clearing but did not approach the vehicle directly, instead circling slightly, watching Daniel, guiding him without crossing that invisible line first. It was waiting for him to understand. Daniel stepped forward, careful, deliberate, his eyes scanning the ground, noticing faint impressions in the soil, disturbances that suggested movement. Someone had been here, recently, and not alone. He felt the weight of the baby again, a reminder that whatever had happened here was connected to the small life he now held, and that realization tightened something in his chest. "You brought the baby out first," he said softly, piecing it together, his voice barely above a whisper, and the dog's ears flicked again, as if acknowledging the truth in that statement. The baby let out another faint sound, a shallow cry that broke the silence just enough to shift the moment, pulling Daniel back to what mattered most. But even as he adjusted his hold and prepared to turn back toward the road, the dog did not move. It remained fixed, eyes locked on the vehicle, on the quiet space around it, as if there was still something left unfinished, something Daniel had not yet seen. And in that pause, with the cold pressing in and the night holding its secrets close, Daniel understood that this was not just a rescue, not just a chance encounter on an empty road, but the beginning of something that had been set in motion long before his headlights ever found that dog sitting in the middle of the asphalt. Daniel did not move right away because something in the way the dog held its ground made it clear that leaving now would mean missing something that could not be explained later, something that mattered just as much as the small life breathing unevenly against his chest. The baby stirred again, a faint, fragile sound that felt like it barely touched the air, and Daniel instinctively adjusted his hold, tucking the blanket tighter, shielding the child from the cold that seemed to settle deeper the longer they stood in that clearing. "I know," he whispered softly, his voice steady, calm, the way he had learned to speak in moments where panic would only make things worse. The dog shifted its weight slightly, then took a few slow steps toward the vehicle, stopping just short of it, careful, deliberate, as if respecting a boundary that Daniel had not yet fully understood. Its head lowered, not in fear, but in focus, eyes scanning the ground near the open door, then lifting again toward Daniel, as if to say, "Look closer." Daniel followed, each step measured, his boots pressing into the soft earth, noticing now what he had missed before, the subtle signs that told a quiet story, faint tracks leading away from the vehicle, not rushed, not chaotic, but purposeful, and then stopping, disappearing into the surrounding darkness. No signs of struggle, no signs of confusion, just absence. He reached the edge of the vehicle and paused, shifting the baby slightly so he could free one hand, his fingers brushing lightly against the cool metal of the door, steadying himself as he leaned just enough to look inside. The interior was still, untouched in a way that felt unnatural, a blanket draped across the back seat, a small bag resting on the floor, items left behind as if someone had intended to return within minutes, not vanish into the night. Daniel's brow tightened, his mind piecing together what he could, not conclusions, not yet, but fragments that did not fit together the way they should. "Someone was here," he said quietly, the words barely audible, and the dog's ears flicked again, acknowledging, confirming without needing to move. The baby let out another soft sound, a weak cry that broke through the stillness just enough to remind Daniel where his priority had to be, and he stepped back from the vehicle, tightening his hold protectively. "We cannot stay," he murmured, more to himself now, the urgency beginning to rise, steady but undeniable. He turned slightly, ready to head back toward the road, to the truck, to warmth and light and help, but the dog did not follow. Instead, it stepped forward once more, moving around the front of the vehicle, stopping near a patch of ground where the soil looked disturbed, darker, uneven in a way that stood out against the rest of the clearing. Daniel hesitated, then followed again, drawn by the same quiet insistence that had led him this far. He crouched slightly, careful not to jostle the baby, and looked closer, noticing a small object half pressed into the dirt, something that caught the faint light just enough to stand out. He reached down slowly, fingers brushing it free, and lifted it into view. A simple item, small, personal, the kind of thing someone would not willingly leave behind. He stared at it for a second, then looked back toward the vehicle, then into the darkness beyond, and the weight of it settled in his chest. Not fear, not yet, but the growing understanding that this was not just a place someone had passed through. This was a place someone had been taken from, or had chosen to leave under circumstances that did not make sense. The dog watched him closely, unmoving, as if waiting for him to reach that exact conclusion, and when he did, something shifted in its posture, not relief, not entirely, but recognition, as if a silent message had finally been received. Daniel exhaled slowly, tightening his grip on the baby, and for the first time since stepping off the road, he understood the full weight of what the dog had done. It had not just saved a life. It had brought him to the truth that still remained hidden in the dark. "Daniel." closed his fingers around the small object, the cool surface pressing into his palm as if it carried more weight than it should. And for a moment he did not look at it again because he already understood what it meant without needing to see it twice. Something had been left behind here that was not meant to be abandoned. The baby shifted in his arms, a fragile movement that pulled him back to the present, and he adjusted his hold instinctively, lifting the child slightly higher against his chest to share what warmth he could, feeling the faint, uneven breath against his jacket. "We are leaving," he said quietly, the decision settling firmly now, not rushed but certain, because whatever truth remained in this clearing could wait, but the baby could not. The dog watched him closely, its amber eyes steady, and for a brief second Daniel thought it might resist again, might try to pull him deeper into the unknown, but instead it stepped back, giving him space, its posture shifting in a way that felt like agreement. Not abandonment, not surrender, just understanding. Daniel turned carefully, retracing his steps through the trees, each movement measured to keep the baby stable, his senses sharper now, more aware of the uneven ground, the low branches, the subtle shifts in sound that marked the difference between open space and enclosed woods. The dog moved beside him this time, not ahead, not leading, but matching his pace, close enough that Daniel could hear the quiet rhythm of its breathing, steady and controlled, like it had already accepted that the first part of its task was complete. The darkness felt less oppressive now, not because it had changed, but because Daniel had something to move toward, the road, the truck, the thin line of light that meant safety. The baby let out another faint sound, slightly stronger this time, a fragile thread of life that made Daniel tighten his hold just a little more. "Stay with me," he murmured again, his voice low, almost a promise carried on breath rather than sound. The path back seemed shorter, though he knew it was not, the trees thinning just enough for the faint glow of headlights to reappear ahead, cutting through the darkness like a quiet signal. When they stepped out of the woods, the cold air felt sharper, cleaner, and Daniel did not hesitate this time. He moved straight to the truck, opening the passenger door with one hand while keeping the baby secure with the other, then carefully lowering the child onto the seat, wrapping the blanket tighter, adjusting it until the small form was protected from the chill. The dog stopped just outside the beam of the headlights, watching, its silhouette framed against the dark road, still and patient. Daniel reached into the truck, grabbing an extra jacket, then turned back, kneeling slightly as he added another layer around the baby, his movements precise, practiced, the way he had learned to handle fragile situations where every second mattered but panic could not be allowed to take over. He glanced at the dog. "You did good," he said quietly, the words simple but carrying more weight than they seemed. And for the first time, the dog's posture softened just a fraction, not fully relaxed, but enough to show that something inside it recognized the meaning. Daniel closed the door gently, then moved quickly to the driver's side, his mind already shifting to the next step, getting help, getting warmth, getting the baby somewhere safe. The engine turned over with a low hum, steady and familiar, and as the headlights stretched down the empty road once more, Daniel looked ahead, then briefly to the side where the dog stood. It did not move. Not yet. It remained there, watching the truck, watching him, as if waiting for one final confirmation that the life it had carried through the dark had truly been passed into safe hands. And in that quiet pause, Daniel understood something he could not fully explain. This was not where the story ended. This was only where the saving began. Daniel did not drive immediately, even with the engine running and the road open in front of him, because something in the way the dog remained still just beyond the headlights held him there for one more second, one more quiet exchange that felt unfinished. The baby's breathing was still uneven but present, a fragile rhythm that filled the cab with a soft, almost invisible urgency, and Daniel kept one hand lightly resting near the small bundle on the seat, as if proximity alone could steady it. He looked back toward the dog again. It had not moved. Not a step. Not a shift. Just standing there, watching, its silhouette outlined by the faint glow of the truck lights, eyes fixed on him with the same calm intensity that had stopped him in the first place. "You are coming," Daniel said quietly, not a command, not even a question, just something spoken into the space between them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the dog stepped forward, one paw at a time, closing the distance until it reached the edge of the road, then the side of the truck, then finally stopping near the passenger door, close enough that Daniel could see the faint rise and fall of its chest, steady, controlled, like it had been waiting for permission it never actually needed. Daniel reached across and opened the door slightly, just enough, and the dog did not hesitate this time. It leapt up with careful precision, landing on the floor space near the seat, positioning itself beside the baby without touching, without crowding, just close enough to be there. Watching, guarding. The door closed with a soft click, sealing them inside a small pocket of warmth and light against the cold stretch of night outside. Daniel exhaled slowly, then shifted the truck into gear, easing forward onto the empty road, the headlights stretching ahead as the trees fell back behind them. The tires hummed softly against the asphalt, a steady sound that grounded the moment, but inside the cab, everything felt sharper, more immediate. The baby made another small sound, slightly stronger now, a fragile cry that broke and reformed like it was learning how to exist again, and Daniel glanced over, checking the blanket, adjusting it gently without taking his eyes off the road for more than a second. Almost there, he murmured, voice low, steady, the way you speak when you need someone to hold on just a little longer. The dog remained still, eyes fixed on the baby, ears alert but relaxed just enough to show that it recognized this new environment as safe, at least for now. Its presence filled the space in a way that was hard to explain, not heavy, not tense, but purposeful, like it had carried something invisible with it into the truck, something that had not been left behind in the woods. Daniel's mind replayed the clearing in fragments, the vehicle, the empty space, the object still resting in his pocket, and the more he thought about it, the more it settled into something undeniable. This was not random. This was not chance. The dog had made decisions, chosen a path, found him, and that meant there was a reason still waiting beyond what he could see. The road curved gently ahead, leading toward the distant glow of town lights barely visible on the horizon, and Daniel pressed the accelerator just slightly, not enough to rush, but enough to move with intention. Beside him, the baby's breathing steadied just a fraction more, and the dog shifted its gaze briefly toward Daniel, then back again, as if confirming what mattered had not changed. And in that quiet, moving through the darkness towards something safer, Daniel understood that whatever answers waited ahead, they would not come from words. They would come from what had already been done, from a dog that refused to leave, and from a life that had been carried through the night for a reason that was only beginning to unfold. The town lights appeared slowly at first, faint and distant like something imagined rather than real, a soft glow resting low against the horizon that grew steadier with each passing mile. And Daniel felt a quiet shift inside him as the darkness around the truck began to loosen its hold, replaced by the subtle promise of warmth, of people, of answers that did not exist in the woods behind him. The baby's breathing had changed, still fragile but no longer as shallow, each small inhale carrying just a little more strength than before, and Daniel found himself listening to it without realizing, matching his own breath to that quiet rhythm as if the two had become connected in some way he could not explain. Beside the seat, the dog remained still, its body relaxed but its attention unwavering, eyes fixed on the child with a focus that had not broken since the moment. It stepped into the road. It did not sleep. It did not look away. It simply watched, as if every second mattered. Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel slightly, his mind returning to the small object in his pocket, the one he had taken from the clearing, and after a moment he reached for it with his free hand, bringing it into the light just enough to see clearly for the first time. It was a simple chain, thin but strong, with a small pendant attached, worn just enough to show it had been handled often, not decorative, not expensive, but personal in a way that made it important. He turned it slightly, catching the light, and saw the faint engraving along the edge, letters small but clear enough to read when held close. A name, or part of one, the beginning of a story that had not yet been finished. Daniel's brow tightened as he looked back at the baby, then at the dog, then forward again toward the approaching town. "You came from somewhere," he said quietly, more to the child than to himself, but the words hung in the air between them, unanswered but not empty. The dog shifted then, just slightly, its head lifting a fraction higher, as if it recognized the object in Daniel's hand even without seeing it directly. And for a brief moment, its focus broke from the baby and settled on him. A quick glance that carried something deeper than instinct. Recognition. Memory. Then it returned to the child, as if confirming that nothing had changed. The truck passed the first streetlight, then another, the glow spreading across the windshield in soft, steady pulses that marked their transition out of isolation and into something closer to safety. And Daniel felt the urgency sharpen again, not panic, but purpose, clear and direct. He slowed slightly as the road widened, scanning for the nearest sign of help, a clinic, a station, anything with light and open doors. And as he turned onto a quieter street lined with darkened buildings and a single illuminated sign in the distance, the baby let out a slightly stronger cry, fragile but unmistakably alive. Daniel exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding, a small release of tension that had built quietly since the moment he saw that figure in the road. "That is it," he murmured, voice low but certain, and the dog's ears lifted just slightly at the sound, not in alarm, but in acknowledgement. The truck rolled forward, steady and controlled, until it came to a stop beneath the glow of the building ahead, and for a moment, everything stilled again. The engine hummed. The lights buzzed softly overhead. The baby breathed, and the dog, still and watchful, remained exactly where it needed to be, as if it understood that the journey through the dark had ended, but whatever came next was only just beginning. Daniel did not rush when he stepped out of the truck, even though every instinct inside him urged him to move faster, because the way he carried the baby mattered just as much as where he was going. And the moment he opened the door, the cold night air was replaced by the steady hum of electric lights spilling from the building ahead, soft but certain, like a promise that had been waiting for them to arrive. He gathered the child carefully into his arms, holding the small body close against his chest, feeling the warmth that had grown just enough to give him hope. And as he turned toward the entrance, the dog jumped down silently beside him, landing without a sound, its presence immediate and unwavering as it fell into step at his side. The door opened with a soft chime, a simple sound that felt louder than it should in that quiet hour, and inside, the air shifted, warmer, brighter, carrying the faint scent of antiseptic and something clean, something safe. A nurse behind the counter looked up, her expression changing instantly as she took in the sight before her. A man carrying a baby wrapped tight in blankets, a German shepherd at his side, both of them marked by the kind of night that left no room for questions. Daniel did not explain everything, not right away, because there was no need for words yet, only action, only urgency delivered in calm, steady motion as he stepped forward and placed the child into waiting hands, careful, precise, letting go only when he knew the baby was supported, secure, no longer dependent on him alone. "Found on the road," he said simply, his voice low, controlled, and the nurse nodded, already moving, already calling for help without hesitation. The baby let out a small cry then, stronger than before, fragile but alive in a way that filled the room with a quiet shift, a change that everyone could feel without needing to say it out loud. Daniel stepped back slightly, his hands empty now, the absence of weight sudden and noticeable, and for a moment he just stood there, watching as the child was carried away, surrounded by light and movement and people who knew what to do next. Beside him, the dog remained still, its gaze fixed on the baby until the last second, until the small form disappeared beyond the doorway, and only then did it lower its head slightly, not in sadness, not in exhaustion, but in something deeper, something that felt like completion. Daniel reached into his pocket, his fingers closing again around the small pendant, and he turned it once more in the light, the engraved letters catching just enough to remind him that this story was not finished, that somewhere beyond this room, beyond this moment, there was still a missing piece waiting to be found. He looked down at the dog. "You knew," he said quietly, not asking, just stating what had become undeniable, and the dog met his gaze for a brief second, calm, steady, as if the answer had always been there. No bark, no movement, just presence, the kind that did not need explanation. Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders in a way that felt earned, not sudden, and as the sounds of the clinic settled into a steady rhythm behind him, he understood something that went beyond the night, beyond the road, beyond the strange chain of events that had brought them here. Some stories do not arrive with answers. They arrive with trust, with choices made in silence, with lives carried through darkness by something that refuses to give up. The dog turned then, just slightly, as if ready to move again, not away, but forward, and Daniel followed its gaze for a moment before looking back toward the hallway where the baby had been taken. Alive. Safe. That was enough for now. And in the quiet space between what had happened and what would come next, one truth settled deeper than all the rest. Some miracles do not ask to be understood. They simply ask to be witnessed.